Hello and welcome to Lucky Week 13. Wow, the summer is right around the corner. So today in statistics, this week in statistics, we are continuing our discussion about t-tests. Now we spent last week talking about the related pairs, control group, test, retest use of the t-test. Now we're moving into the independent samples t-test. Same idea. You're comparing the means, except what you're looking at are independent samples, meaning you're actually measuring different populations. So I want to take a little look at that. We'll take a look on the iPad here. Here I have the decision tree that we have been looking at all along. And you'll see that we are going to be, we are starting here by calculating means. We have more than one mean. In fact, we have two of them. This is what we covered last week. This is what we are covering this week, the independent samples t-test. Now, what this relates to is the image on the left is what we did last week. The image on the right is what we're doing this week. So I'm going to explain to you one study. A study, let's say, that I wanted to figure out whether or not students did better when they had slideshows to go along with the lecture in my psych class. So I can do that experiment in a number of ways to answer different types of questions. So if I was going to explore that question as you can see it on the left here, I'm looking at all college students that are taking the psych class. So I take a sample and I take two samples, and one group attends a class with the slideshows and another group attends class without the slides. Now this is just random sampling from within all college students. That's the bigger population. Now they're related pairs because when I'm doing that sampling, I want to make sure that I have a good sample, that if gender's an issue, if GPA is an issue, then I would want to make sure that each one of these samples has equal distributions of those kinds of things. So the only real difference between sample 1 and sample 2 will be sample 1 got the slideshows and sample 2 didn't get the slideshows. Now, in the second study, it looks very similar. However, what I'm looking at in the second study is there a difference between having slideshows for psychology students versus nursing students? The independent variable in this particular instance is not the slideshows. In first instance, the independent variable was the slideshow. I look at its effectiveness and I find out the dependent variable would be like a test on the material. In the second study, the independent variable is which program the students are in. The sample 1 and sample 2 are differentiated from each other. They're not meant to be the same like they are in the first study. They're meant to be different, and the difference between the two samples is the independent variable. So I'm trying to discern whether or not psychology students benefit from slideshows better or worse than nursing students benefit from slideshows. So you see, this is a slightly different thing. This is the kind of study when we're comparing groups, when we're comparing anybody that has, we're looking at different socioeconomic status, we're looking at different genders, we're looking at different grade levels, different athletic levels, different levels of experience, but less experienced over here, more experienced over here, and test why those groups are different. Those are all independent samples. When we are using control groups or when we're doing test-retest, that is the related pairs t-test. And you would not believe how many studies that covers. That is a huge, huge collection of what we do in statistics when we're studying psychology. So what we talked about last week, it's related pairs. So we either have the same group of people getting tested twice and we're comparing those means, or we have two selected groups and one is the control group and we compare means. That is the related pairs t-test. This week we're looking at independent samples where the independent variable is what differentiates those groups. In the example on the slideshow was one group was psychology students, the other one was nursing students, and that is the independent variable. So what I'm having you do in terms of the discussion is to go into the literature, find a peer-reviewed study that actually uses independent samples. It's comparing groups. There's a lot of them. This should not be too much of a problem. Make sure that you are using a good quality source, either you're using EBSCO or you're using Google Scholar. You're not just try to get away from the websites things, although sometimes those, many times people are using those in a very valid way, but I'd like you to have some experience reading those articles. In the quiz, it's just looking at the difference between related pairs and independent samples, kind of thing. And in the assignment, I'm having you do a study on sharks. So that's cool. So you're doing a little study on sharks that gives you some data to compare sharks from different locations. And then the last thing I want to talk about is if you look into if you look at the program timeline, you'll see a note that due this week is that you start looking at articles for your project planning assignment. I want to spend a little bit of time with you right now with that. The major project in this class is to plan for the research methods class that you're going to be taking next. Many of you are planning on taking that this summer. The research project in the research methods class is a replication of an existing study. So the instructions that I'm providing for people is that they would go and use the application called Monitor on Psychology. It's a free download and it gives you access to a journal that is published by the American Psychological Association. A feature in each edition of that journal is a section called In Brief. In that area, the magazine will highlight 7 to 10 different studies that have occurred that they've become aware of, and it gives some highlights about that particular study. It also usually gives you a link, so you can actually go and look at the abstract for that particular study. What you're going to be searching for is you get the app, you start looking at these, you start reading these, and you find one that's interesting and potentially doable for you next semester. So you have to, for this semester, you have to write a proposal for what you're going to be doing in the research methods class. So you start looking at those articles now to find the one that you potentially want to do. Now, I'm really encouraging you to get started on this and get it done quickly. There's not too much to this assignment other than getting it ready. We'll spend much more time looking at the proposal when we go into research methods. However, it's a good time to narrow that down as to what study do you want to do. And I want you to reach out to me specifically to let's talk about your choice of studies, because I understand a little bit more in depth about the kind of time frame you have, what resources we have, whether we can really do it or not without getting into complexities that we want to avoid. I want this to be doable, interesting, but also relatively less complicated as your first real psychological study. So this is something that you have a lot of control over. You can go into them and find a really interesting article about whatever subject you want to study. And your work is going to be to prepare, in line with the content in the course book, prepare a proposal to be submitted as part of this class, a graded part of this class that anticipates and begins the planning process of the assignment, of the major assignment you're going to be doing in research methods. So that should start now. We only have a few more weeks of class, plenty of time to get it done, but it does mean you're going to be going in there. Take a look at that section in the course book under special assignments to see what that proposal for your research project is all about. And let's get started on that. Please send me an email, post in the discussion board any questions or thoughts you might have about this, and we can get this started, and you'll be in a very good place heading into research methods when you take that. All right, so that's good for this week. Have a great week. Enjoy the weather as much as you can. Bring your iPad outside so you can look for those articles while you're enjoying the weather. And I will see you in the discussion board this week. Take care.